Hi everyone, welcome back to Real Talk, our campus weekly video series where we discuss relationships, empathy, advocacy, and life. All of our episodes are pre-recorded and released every Tuesday on our IGTV and Facebook page through a YouTube link. So today we are again joined by Sydney, and we're going to be discussing toxic masculinity. So I'm really excited about this episode to dive into some examples, what it looks like, but I think to start off the episode on the right foot for anyone who's listening, because I think the question becomes like, is masculinity by itself toxic? And the answer is a resounding no. That is not what we're saying. So I think it's really important that we start off saying that when we're talking about toxic masculinity, it's very different than when we're talking about just masculinity in general. Because there are a lot of really positive qualities that are masculine, and anyone can carry or have masculine traits and masculine characteristics. It's not just men who can be masculine in different ways. Masculine, feminine are kind of the binary, right? But it's a spectrum. So we can all have behaviors and traits that are somewhere along that spectrum, regardless of our gender identity. And there are lots of really positive qualities related to masculine traits. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the toxic parts of masculinity, and what that can look like and how it relates to the work that we do. So I thought it would be fun, because our version of fun is this, to bounce off some examples, just kind of like rapid fire, and just go back and forth and see how many we can come up with of examples of toxic masculinity. So I'll start us off and then we can just jump around. So the first one that I think of is the notion that boys can't or shouldn't cry.
Holly?
I would say that there's like this idea that they have to kind of be like that playboy, like they can't ever settle down. There's that toxic masculinity trait, especially in like college aged men, or identifying as men. That's something that's really popular, like the idea that you need to be like a stud or a playboy.
Right, you're cool or something like that.
Yeah.
I think like young boys, like toddlers and stuff, like not being able to play with baby dolls, or like parents being afraid if their boy wants to play with a baby doll or likes a pink toy or shirt or whatever.
Yeah, I like the colors. That's a good one too. And toys. Yeah. I had it. It fell in my head. Knowing, or the notion or idea that violence, or like, I was going to say loudness, but that's not really the word I'm going for, but just kind of like a really strong presence, very outspoken,
like almost aggressive.
Aggressive. Yeah, like aggressive, kind of like boss kind of attitude equals power. And that can be really negative and dangerous and harmful if it's obviously in violence. So that's another one.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of that one, there's that need for like being dominant, like being in charge when you walk into a room. Just
or
like
in a relationship.
Yeah.
Pants, kind of.
Like you have to wear the pants. You're the man. Like that is your role, and not budging on that at all. Like not having that flexibility.
Right.
Yep.
I know of a guy who refuses to hold a purse. Like refuses to, hey, can you hand me my purse? Like
to even hold it in their hand.
Like
can't touch it.
Can't
use tongs to like transfer it.
If you could.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's an example of how how toxic masculinity will impact men and like what they are afraid or comfortable to do. So yeah, that's one of the first ones that came to my mind when we were prepping for the episode.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good specific one, because I was thinking kind of similarly, like the behaviors kind of. I think about the documentary The Mask You Live In, and it's all about they use the word posturing, and I thought that was a really good word, and just really good emotion of like feeling like you constantly have to prove yourself, prove your manhood, prove your
way with it. Yeah.
Yeah, staking your claim that I'm a man and I'm going to prove it. And sometimes that can be by acting violently, by acting aggressively, by, whatever, by not showing emotion, but showing anger or showing that type of emotion. But I had another one, and I'm going to go back to Holly. Sorry, I forgot.
Actually, what you're just talking about made me think of like when I was growing up and like how it was okay for like if I was stressed out, I could take a moment and like maybe go take like a bubble bath or like do something that is relaxing. But if like my brother was stressed out and he wanted to go take a bubble bath, like that was a no. Like that was like something he couldn't do.
Wow.
Like I remember vividly hearing my dad being like, no, like that's not what guys do. And I was like, no, sir. But like just like that, like raising boys versus raising girls, there's just like the way people are like trained almost in parenting. It's just so ingrained in us. And like I was thinking when you were saying that guy wouldn't pick up the purse, like it's almost like a lack of feminist allyship, if that makes sense. Like they're not willing to even look at another issue because it'll lessen their manhood.
I think
or they're afraid to. Like
or they're afraid to.
They might want to, or some men might want to, but they are afraid of the consequence, which is, I think, what we'll talk about in a bit. But sorry, I skipped over you saying.
But no, that makes sense. Like, what is that? Like, afraid to get a part of toxic masculinity is being afraid to get in touch with the feminine characteristics that you might have. Like you were saying in the beginning, Cara, like it's this continuum, and we all have feminine or masculine traits in some version. And I think like toxic masculinity is making people who identify as men be afraid to get in touch with the feminine characteristics of like, I'm sad, or I want to take a bubble bath, and whoever assigned that as like to be feminine or masculine, that is society over a zillion years.
Totally. And I think that's what's an important place to kind of guide our conversation too, is obviously we know that gender is a social construct. And so that means that our masculine and feminine traits are also related to how we socialize in our culture. Like, it has nothing to do with biology, like it has nothing to do with science, or whatever. Yeah. It's how we express ourselves. It's how we identify with ourselves. And there is that spectrum of emotions, behaviors, expressions, etc. And I think the one expression that comes to mind too, that I think is a part of toxic masculinity, and I'm sure we'll touch on later, is the expression "boys will be boys," as like an excuse for a lot of the behaviors that we were talking about today, of like, even when boys are young, to be like, oh, they're roughhousing, boys will be boys. Oh, they're getting, like violent, like they lashed out, oh, boys will be boys. Or like they teased someone, and whatever, oh, boys, and it's just used as an excuse.
Right.
Behaviors. And when you're taking the identity into play with that, like it's not okay to excuse harmful behaviors no matter what. But when you're especially using like, oh, because they're a boy, because they're a man, that's why they're behaving this way, it takes all of the accountability out of that behavior and places it on this social construct that we have created so we can uncreate it. So it just feels like such an excuse and such a like cop out, for behaviors that can escalate. It's not to say that every boy who's ever roughhoused when they were a child is going to turn into an abuser or a perpetrator or whatever, but it excuses the behavior and then masks it so that there's no responsibility taken if it does escalate to that. So I know I'm getting way ahead of ourselves in the conversation. That was the phrase that I thought of too with toxic masculinity.
Well, that's like when we're little, and like I was just thinking of like the movie He's Just Not That Into You, and the beginning of it, all these girls are getting like pushed over by guys, and they're like, oh, he's doing that because he likes you. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, just that is like put in like the girl's head as a child, and it excuses
boys that's how you show, like if you do act,
that's how you show affection, is by pushing a girl over,
like, and it just builds and it builds and it builds,
and
eventually I'm like you had said, Cara, like this is where we're gonna go with the conversation, and maybe we're already here, but
we've arrived. Well, that made me think too of homophobia is a huge part of toxic masculinity. Transphobia is a huge part of toxic masculinity, right? This fear of, if I behave like, or if I am gay, or if I am trans, I am now going to be, it's almost like you're kicked out of this exclusive club. It's like this, you're put in a, in talking about this episode, I wanted to bring up Tony Porter and his organization, A Call to Men. And he and Jackson Katz talk a lot about the man box, right? Of this, like, here's a box, put all the things that make up what our society deems masculine, or what our society deems what it means to be a real man. And a lot of it can be really positive, but there's a lot of it that can be really negative. And if, like we talked about all these examples, and if you go against it, if you go outside of the box, let's say a man does show emotion like crying or sadness or fear or anxiety, right? One of the emotions that we somehow have equated to feminine, you'll notice that there's a pattern, right? That any of those behaviors that are considered like the opposite of masculine are feminine, or used in homophobic kind of, I was gonna say, like degrading ways, right? Of like making it seem like it's bad to be feminine, or bad to be gay, or bad to be trans. And that's where the message then comes that, like, if you're not this, you're not a real man, and it's bad to be anything else, which essentially is saying that it's bad to be a woman, it's bad to be gay, it's bad to be trans. Like, you shouldn't want to have any of those characteristics if you want to be a real man.
Right.
Yeah. It almost creates like a lesser than situation.
It does, exactly that. Yeah. And then it forces a lot of young boys and men to either feel like they have to constantly, like, I'm referring to the mask you live in kind of, metaphor of like, put on that mask of like, I have to behave this way to be accepted by other people.
Yeah.
And not just by other men. Like, there are plenty of other women, other people who perpetuate the same, like, there are plenty of moms who will say like, oh, man up, or, be a man. Like, those terms are thrown around by anyone, not just men. But I think it digs a little deeper when it's coming from another man. Like, if it's a father talking to a son, right? Or like a father figure.
There's like a disappointment piece there if you don't achieve, or if you don't stay in that box.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the thing we haven't even really talked about too yet is how it impacts, like I'm thinking like finances and maybe the gender wage gap and like all of that stuff, like, just has this huge impact. And like, there's conversation around like how women maybe don't want to earn as much as men because the men are supposed to be the providers or whatever. And like, women today are like, no, you can pay me more. Like, I've seen stuff on like Instagram and stuff like that. Like, people think that like, we don't want to make, or we women don't want to make like men feel insecure, like, because we need more money. And it's like, no, like, not even.
No, I'm sorry. I will gladly take a man's salary.
I would 100% take a man's salary.
Right?
No
like,
shame.
I'm not really concerned about it. But then like, the other side of that is like, men in heterosexual relationships feeling insecure if their female partner like makes more than them, because for whatever reason they're supposed to make more, they're supposed to be the provider, or the one who brings in the most money.
The threaten, like the feeling of feeling threatened in that relationship because their partner, if it is a heterosexual relationship and they're a woman, is making more money, or is just more successful, or like, doing more things in their career.
And being afraid of their family members to find out that like their girlfriend or female partner or makes more money than they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I remember with one of my past relationships, like, I got my master's, and that was like a point of contention because I had one more degree than he did. Wow. And I was like, okay, I decided to put myself through grad school. Like, that was my choice. I decided that, and now I have my master's. And he was like, oh, now you're going to hold that over me. And I was like, well, that's why he's an ex, obviously. But like, it's just like, even education wise, like, if you get the same degrees as them, it's, right. Well, and now I'm making it an us them situation, which I don't want to do, but that can be
the toxic part of it, for sure.
Yeah, that's the toxic part.
And that like it creates the lesser than side of it from the time we, and I mean we as all of us people, are infants. Like it creates, oh, you throw like a girl, or oh, don't let that girl beat you up. Like that's embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. And like the STEM.
I don't be beating anybody up, but like you understand what I mean.
Yeah, and like women in STEM are like people going into those majors that were mostly men for most of the time, like doctors, engineering. I remember my dad saying that he went to RPI and he was like, oh, you could get in there with a great scholarship just because you're a girl. And I was like, well, also I have good grades and like I earned my spot if I wanted to go there. But
and I feel like that's very common for people of color to get that same, like, what is it called? Imposter syndrome fear, right? Of people are going to say, oh, you only got this job because you're in a minority or
you
whatever.
check the boxes.
Yeah, which is so unfair. And it already, you know, those like affirmative action or whatever were put in place, first off, for women, particularly for white women. So already like putting, you know, marginalized groups behind again. Right. And so people don't even realize like things like affirmative action were for women to get access to right jobs and things. But then also the reason it was put in place because there were already so many barriers that our society and culture put there to prevent women and people of color and marginalized communities to accessing those things. So it's not because it's like, anyway, not to get too off on a tangent, but yeah.
But that's that toxic piece coming out. It threatens their ability to hold power over the workplace or over their home or over certain pieces. Like that threatens the power that toxic masculinity loves to hold. And that's where the issues come in.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with this conversation.
I know. I feel like we could, I mean, I don't want to make this part of the conversation too long because I know we wanted to talk about a few other things. So maybe we can shift real quickly into, there were a couple examples that we wanted to bring to light to this conversation. And I think the first one that is just to me the funniest. I mean, it's not funny because it's, you know what I mean? But just because I was like, what? Why are people so angry about this? Was when Harry Styles wore a skirt and dress in his Vogue shoot, and people were, the internet exploded. And it was like, what? Why are people? And I think the why and the funny to me was like, because people were angry about it. It wasn't even like oh, that's interesting or that's curious or like, oh no, my internet's unstable. I'm not freezing.
You're good. We could hear you.
Okay. Yeah, of just feeling like it was relating back to what we were just saying, such a threat to their own masculinity or to their own manhood. And obviously that's not to say that all men, right? Like this is not like all men participate in toxic masculinity or that all men agree with those behavior or whatever. There are plenty of men, I think the majority honestly, that try or do resist and challenge those behaviors, but are met with being called names that I refuse to say because they're so derogatory on here. And typically names that are, and I'm sure our audience can assume without me even saying what the words are, they're homophobic or they're sexist, that are used to put down someone. So again, relating back to that man box that we were talking about earlier. So Harry Styles, I think that was a good example of like, we are so rooted in, or culture is so rooted in this like binary of masculine, feminine, and what it's supposed to look like, that a man wearing a dress on a magazine was like an uproar.
Right. And it's like just immediate discomfort. And I think really like I would encourage people to watch that Man Box TED Talk that we were talking about, Trump Borders, because
for sure.
That's where things clicked for me, like when I started studying this stuff. And I think it's an interesting, like, people are just horrifically uncomfortable when you step out of that box, whether it's the man box or the box that women are supposed to fit into. Like society just like reacts in really negative ways.
Yeah.
And I think women can also be guilty of the toxic masculinity. Because like if a woman tells a man like, oh, you shouldn't do that, that's like my job, or like, oh, I don't really like they can put them down and make them feel smaller or lesser than just by being like, oh, well, that's what I'm supposed to do, or that's not what a guy does. Just like little things.
Totally.
Yeah. So I know the other example we wanted to bring up, because it's been very recent, is the potato head.
Yeah. They drop Mr. and Mrs. and people are like, but
Freaking
that's
out.
what they
People
are.
freaking out.
They're freaking out. And I'm like, it's a child's toy.
But I think
Perspective, guys.
it's such a funny example. Again, it's not funny in the sense that, like, obviously these are related to and connected to serious issues, which is going to be the last part of our conversation that we'll get into in a minute. But that people made it such a big deal when it's such a, it's like, to me, I see it the same way as like honoring someone's pronouns. It's like people make such a huge deal out of it. Of like, oh my gosh, I have to remember all these pronouns. How am I going to do what does that even have? And you're like, you use they all the time. Like, you don't even realize. But
you remember names. So like, they're all different.
Right, exactly. So it's like, and it's not that much effort to just,
and if it's
like, baseline respect a human being that's in front of you.
if it's going to make the other person that you're speaking with feel comfortable and feel more at peace in their own body, why can't you do that?
Like, it takes 2 seconds. It's not even that much effort. It's not like you have to do all this research. It's not like requiring
putting more energy into it to like disagree and fight against it than saying, okay, cool, and like moving forward.
Exactly. So yeah,
it's a 2-second like
funny.
Yeah, no, and I think like just the reaction, because I remember seeing the first time I saw the thing about Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head like changing or whatever, I was like, oh, this is gonna cause a thing. Like, I'd be annoyed. I don't care. Okay, cool. Sounds great. Like, let's bring attention to the fact that gender is a social construct, and like, and like, let's let people identify in whatever ways they want to.
Yeah.
But now we have to deal with people on Facebook being irritated, and like I don't know, family members are gonna bring it up and be like, Sydney, can you believe it? I'm like, I'm cool with it. Like, whatever, it's fine.
Right, like, who cares? Like, cool.
Yeah, it happened.
Like, who cares? Don't buy the toy if you don't want to. I don't get it.
Right. It doesn't really impact. Well, and I think that's why, like, these are funny examples that probably won't make a significant impact in someone's life as much as the examples we gave in the beginning, right? Like the really harmful attitudes and expected, behaviors and roles that contribute to violence. And that's why we're talking about toxic masculinity today, other than the fact that it's very fun for us to talk about this topic, clearly. But because it's so linked with domestic violence, with sexual violence, right? These attitudes that we were giving examples before of like they push you on the playground, that means that they like you. Those types of messages, like, could you imagine if someone was 18 and was told the same thing? Oh, they shoved you or punched you in the face, that must mean that they really love you. Like, hello, there is a problem with that message. And when we're saying it to children are sponges. They absorb messages. They absorb even the ones that are not so in their face, like the blue and the pink, that like they absorb everything.
Or the cooking versus doing work outside and things like they don't all have to look, and they don't all look incredibly jarring at first. Like, right. It's okay to punch someone in the face. Like, sometimes it just is this thing that, like we said before, like makes it lesser than, or makes you lesser than. I always go back to the like, you throw like a girl thing. I don't know how to better explain it, like, because it's just like it kind of stops there. Like, carry it on forever. You tell whatever girl hears somebody say that to a boy, she thinks, okay, well, I'm never gonna be good enough. I'm never gonna be able to, because I'm always gonna throw like a girl because I am a girl. And like it just perpetuates into this, like, it's like the bottom of the pyramid of rape culture that we talk about.
It is.
Yeah. And there was that Dove ad where they showed like fight like a girl, throw like a girl, run like a girl, and they did it with like 10-year-olds, and then they did it with like 18-year-olds, and the girls that were told to throw like a girl at 18 were like, eh. But like, the 10-year-olds were like going fully for it. They were like, yeah, I'll throw. I'm throwing like myself.
Check me out.
Yeah, and just watching like the gender norms take place at certain ages. And I would say like middle school, high school is probably where it really sets in.
Yeah, definitely.
You start to see these like problematic behaviors. So
Yeah, well, and that's why I think it's so funny to me and I keep saying funny because it's, if you don't laugh, you cry. So I feel like I just have to laugh sometimes because we're doing the work. But for people who may not see it all the time, it can get exhausting to constantly have to like, oh my gosh, an advertisement, a movie I just watched, someone just said this sexist thing to me, whatever it might be. It's exhausting to constantly have to battle those. But I have to use humor because that's the way I cope with it. But when people make such a deal out of like, oh, they're children, why are we pushing these, you know, the potato head, why are we blah, blah, blah? And it's like, because they're already absorbing the negative messages at that age. So why would we not want to help them absorb positive messages that can help prevent things from happening in the future? That, you know, like, oh, I wonder why sexual violence is happening. Well, I think, Sydney, you brought up the perfect point of the pyramid. So for those who don't know, we've referenced it a couple of times in our episode, but there is a pyramid that's been done a few different ways, like as a graphic to explain sexual violence or domestic violence, in that essentially the bottom of the pyramid is homophobia, sexism, objectification, transphobia, and these kind of rigid, harmful gender norms and stereotypes. Then it kind of escalates. So then we might see more like problematic behaviors that might escalate to sexual harassment, and then it escalates to actual violence, like domestic violence, sexual violence, etc., on kind of the top of the pyramid. And the reason it's in a pyramid, or sometimes it's done in like a circle kind of
cycle.
Cycle, I think that was the word, because they contribute to one another. So if we didn't have these attitudes and beliefs about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, disregarding gender non-conforming or non-binary or trans people, out, you know, just excluding them from the conversation, having that transphobia, homophobia. If we didn't have those beliefs already, then we wouldn't see those turn into actions, you know, in gender-based violence against those populations and those people. And it's the same thing with these attitudes of like, you throw like a girl, you know, it's not going to be every single man that hears that is then going to turn into an abuser. I always give the like kind of example, it's not actually rooted in any statistics, but I just give the example of if you're in a room of 10 guys and one out of those 10 guys hears a sexist joke or a rape joke or toxic masculinity type of behaviors and absorbs it and internalizes it, that one person out of the 10. Maybe the other ones are able to shrug it off or not, you know, take it to heart or like not, you know, actually mean it or want that. But that one person does. We're normalizing that behavior. Then that one person starts to catcall or, you know, inappropriately make comments towards another coworker or a friend or whatever, or a partner. Normalized because we're saying, oh, what's the big deal? Who cares? It's boys will be boys. And then when it escalates into abuse or violence or sexual violence, and we're like scratching our heads like, how did we let this happen? It's because we normalized it all along for that one person potentially in that group of 10. It's not to say that all of those guys are going to turn into it, you know.
And I think for the other 9, right, that might hear that stuff, when we challenge toxic masculinity and these thoughts and these behaviors, we're helping to create allies too. So I think like, yes, that part of the conversation, a huge part of it is like why we don't want to teach this stuff because it can escalate, but like also like Mr. Potato Head or like getting rid of the Mr. Potato Head thing, like we're creating allies from the time people are very, very young to help them start stepping out of this box and remind the guy and at 15 on the football team or whatever that it's okay to cry because you're upset about something. You know what I mean? Like we're creating more positive effects as well.
Yeah. You're allowing for the flexibility.
Right.
And a huge part of this conversation too, I know we've been focusing a lot on like gender-based violence against marginalized communities, against women, but men are victims of domestic and sexual violence as well, and a huge population that's ignored in these conversations. That's also a part of toxic masculinity. The fact that we don't even acknowledge, not us, but like society, right, doesn't want to acknowledge that males are victims of child sexual. I mean, the statistics for child sexual abuse against young boys, and often perpetrated by other men, which is why I think the conversations are centered around men as allies and men as bystanders, right? And like, because statistically perpetrators tend to be men, but that doesn't mean that victims can't be men as well.
Yeah.
So it's calling to the men who engage in healthy behaviors to say, don't stand for this anymore, you know, and also you're allowed to feel your feelings fully, and reach out for help, and it's okay. And I know we didn't even get to talk about the mental health effects for men of having to, you know, juggle all of these different things. So I think maybe that's just for a place for us to kind of land and end our conversation, to share any final thoughts related to the impact it has, toxic masculinity has on men, can be maybe our final.
Yeah. Holly?
Sorry. Something just turned on in my room and it freaked me out, and I've been like slightly distracted, but it's just like I started hearing a voice and then I realized my TV like turned on. Anyways, no, I just feel like what you're saying is so true, that there needs to be this permission for guys to be able to stand up and to break out of the box that we've been talking about throughout the episode, because it allows, not only it allows them to be like allies, but it allows them to have a voice in a place that they might not feel comfortable, and being able to express that smaller voice that might be masking like your depression or other mental health issues that come up that you might not feel okay talking about because of the toxic masculinity. So I feel like this topic could go on and on forever because there's just so many facets to it, but I think the most important is to create allies and to create the sense that it's okay to feel something that might not be attributed with masculinity.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think like the other piece of it too that I just wanted to share, and obviously it's a larger conversation, but Cara, what you were saying about like men who are victims and things like that, if there's a man who's in like an abusive relationship, especially like in a heterosexual relationship, and that perpetrator is a female or identifies as female, like they're less likely to be believed in all of the things that you were saying, because it's like, oh, well, can it really be that bad? Like men can't be raped, or, you know, that's not true. Like that's not happening. Like she's not abusive towards you. Like grow up, man up, whatever it might be. Like it prevents people from being able to ask for help and to reach out. And like how many times are men, women, anyone of any identity dismissed because of the things when they're trying to reach out and say, hey, I feel uncomfortable in my relationship, or I feel unsafe because of all this stuff that's happened, and boys will be boys and this is okay, and that's just what they do, so get used to it, kind of a thing. So I think to anybody listening or anybody watching, like challenge yourself to think critically about this topic and like the impacts that it has when you zoom out and when you look. Don't just look at the children's toy that's changing, like zoom out and look at the effects, positive and negative, that this kind of stuff will have on everyone.
Yeah, I took the words that were in my head and just made them perfect, so I have nothing else to add to, because that was exactly what I was thinking. And my only kind of final thought would be to anyone who's listening who is a male survivor of domestic or sexual violence. Like, I know you might be thinking, you're called the Women's Center, who are you to talk about supporting men? But we are for everyone. We're going to be going through rebranding, so we're going to have a new name that's more reflective of all of the people that we serve, because we recognize, that was the exact reason, right, that we're going through this rebranding process, is to recognize that it does sound exclusive. It sounds like it's not welcoming to people of all identities, but we absolutely 1000% recognize that men are victims of domestic and sexual violence and deserve a space to feel heard and seen. And that, you know, we've been talking about toxic masculinity and all the effects it has on society, but the effects it has on the individuals as well, the men that internalize it and struggle with it and battle with it, maybe because they're LGBTQ, maybe because they're, you know, in touch with other feminine characteristics and are getting called names and being bullied. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about like the amount of bullying that happens, right, and all that. So if you're listening and you're struggling with it and you are a man or identify as a man and you need support, please know that we are here for you. We see you. And that was just my final thought. So as always, remember that these episodes are pre-recorded so you can view them anytime on our IGTV or our Facebook through the YouTube channel. And please share with your friends, give us your thoughts or feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And tune in next week for our next episode. Thanks for listening.